Hey everyone, Joshua Kirk here with you once again, and now it's time for that moment you've all been waiting for, my top 10 albums of 2019. I am really looking forward to this part of the list. These are the albums that I think defined 2019 in the best way. In my opinion, at least, these are the albums that I think are very essential to this year, and therefore these are the ones that I definitely recommend the most out of all of my albums in the top 50. Without further ado, let's just get to this amazing top 10 I put together. For my number 10, it's one of the better hip-hop albums to be released by a UK rapper this year. That is the new Little Simz record, Grey Area. And as you can tell from my review of this album, it probably doesn't surprise you. It made it into the top 10. This album, like, Simz's flows and her bars are absolutely fire. Some of the features on here are really good, and also Inflow's production, I think, complements her delivery very well, which not only is the sound of this album in the vein of hip-hop, but also in, like, there's elements of soul, some garage rock, and reggae to be incorporated into this album. If you look in the liner notes of my number 32 album, which is the Michael Kiwanuka album, you'll see that Inflow is also one of the co-producers on that album, and I will say a lot of his production work in 2019 has been absolutely excellent, and this Little Simz album is no exception. And I love how, even though the record is short, it is just so laser-focused, because Little Simz has put together her best work to date, according to a lot of people. So, then at number 9, we have the new Big Thief record, Two Hands. Man, this is, in my opinion, Big Thief at their best. I definitely loved this album when I first heard it, but I have to admit, in the past couple of months, it has progressively grown on me to the point of it definitely being my objective favorite Big Thief album. I mean, I still think their 2017 album Capacity is a great album. Definitely my second favorite album by them. But this album is like a really nice improvement for the band on what they're really good at, and it's definitely an improvement, especially from their last album, which most people loved, but me personally wasn't really that impressed by. This record, though it is kind of a back-to-basics return to form for the band, it still feels very refreshing. And also, Adrian Lanker's songwriting and singing is as strong as it's ever been. The sound of this record is great. And also, some of the guitar work on this album is some of the finest I've heard on one of their albums. I mean, Buck Meek's solo at the end of the song Not, my god, that solo it kills me every time. I love it so much. Definitely in my top 5 songs of the year, for sure. An incredible album with really no room for filler, in my opinion. It definitely deserves its critical acclaim. Then at number 8, this is my favorite underground hip-hop record of the year. I mean, it's even better than the Billy Woods album, which is saying a lot. And it comes from the rapper known as Wiki, formerly of Rat King, with the album OOFIE. This is such a great album. Wiki is a rapper that I'm still kind of investigating more about, as he sort of came to me kind of out of nowhere, but I'm so glad that I stumbled upon this guy, because I love just how vulnerable and heartfelt his delivery and his lyrics are. He really has a great sense of youth to his music, even though he definitely is growing up on this album too. And also, he is New York through and through, all the way down to his accent, which I think paints his lyrics very well. And also, I think the beats are pretty versatile on this album too. It ranges from kind of soulful beats to incorporating elements of world music to some of the nastiest grind beats I've heard in all of hip-hop this year. The track Pesto being a perfect example of that. Some of the features on this album were really good too. The track Grim featuring Little Ugly Mane and Denzel Curry certainly was one of the standouts here. And definitely one of the darker songs I think Wiki has written too. The Year-Old Droog feature was great. The Princess Nokia feature was pretty cool too. It's a fantastic record. Definitely highly recommended. Then number 7 is my favorite electronic record of the year, and that is the new Anna Meredith album, FIBS. I first sort of heard Anna Meredith's music through seeing the movie 8th Grade in 2018. Great movie. Also thought the score in the film was pretty cool. And I decided to go ahead and check out this album because I heard some critics on the internet saying it was definitely one of her best. And boy, am I glad I decided to do that, because this album is like, I was floored by it, that's for sure. I just love how epic and sort of genre-bending her music is. I mean, she definitely does layer electronics in a pretty satisfying way, but also adds in elements of classical and art rock for good measure, and also blends the electronics beautifully with live instrumentation, which in this case would be guitar, drums, cello, and tuba. And also, this album is a perfect balance between these really cinematic instrumental pieces along with poppier tunes here also. And also some of the visuals that she's made for some of these songs, including that video for Paramore. They fit the songs perfectly. Like, it's quite an experience just taking a little virtual ride through that train line in that video as I'm listening to probably one of the best songs on the album. So definitely an incredible experience that I had this year. That is worth your time. Then at number 6. My number 6, man. This album is like, it's one of the weirdest combos of sounds I've heard this year. But it's unlike anything else that I've heard this year, for sure. And I think it makes sense that, people that may have initially kind of considered it a joke now are like taking it more seriously and explaining why it is one of the best of the year, because it just most certainly is. It's 100 gecs. It's 1,000 gecs. So weird, so wild, so catchy. Man, I love this album so much. I mean, this is the kind of record where it's kind of dangerous when I start listening to it. I mean, like, when I turn on the first couple of minutes of the album, like, I have to literally get myself the courage to turn it off, because if I just let it play, I'll just end up listening to the whole damn thing. And I'm pretty addicted to this album too. It's a mixture of like emo rap, pop punk, trance, dubstep, industrial, bubblegum bass. It's all blended together really well on this album, and also the songwriting is also quite interesting, hilarious, covering a variety of topics like capitalism, depression, obsession with dating apps, and all kinds of stuff like that. That it essentially takes all these different genres that became popular through the internet. It basically sort of creates this deliciously mind-bending substance out of them. I just love this record. And the fact that it's only 23 minutes only makes the ideas that they throw in there just that much more exciting. Yeah, and speaking of exciting, my number 5 is probably the most exciting left field hip-hop record of the year, and that is the self-titled Injury Reserve album. This album, it grew on me. It grew on me for sure. I mean, it's strange, I didn't really love it for a little while, but, then when I came back and listened to it and really sort of lauded over all the amazing ideas, I definitely, this one definitely finally kind of snuck its way into my year-end list. I mean, just the production on here is fantastic. Grog's and Richie's delivery on this album is great. Some of the features, I think, complement it really well. From like Rico Nasty, Cakes to Killa, JPEGMAFIA, Many, who delivered a pretty dope verse onto Jailbreak the Tesla, Freddie Gibbs, who killed it on the song Wax On, Dram is on here too, and actually, I just realized Dylan Brady is on this record too. How did I not know Dylan Brady was on this album? I don't know, why I missed that. Anyway, this album is great, and I love how, even though there are a pretty good amount of features on this album, they don't take over the album. It still feels like Injury Reserve is the main attraction here. They're just supporting roles here. Kind of in the same way the features on Tyler's Igor were kind of more supporting roles, and as it was definitely purely a Tyler project at its core. I think Injury Reserve has made all the improvements they needed to make. I definitely think they've solidified themselves as one of hip-hop's most innovative groups out there. My number 4, another album that grew on me, and an album that, as you can see, I proudly display on my vinyl shelf, the new Pup album, Morbid Stuff. This is my rock album of the year. I love this album so much. It definitely spoke to me more than any other rock album this year did, for sure. And definitely, I love it more than my review gave it credit for sure. I just love the killer performances, the awesome hooks, the very dark songwriting. Some of Stefan Babcock's most harrowing and mature poetry to date. I mean, the song Scorpion Hill literally brought me to tears when I heard it, for sure. Also love how diverse this album is. It's definitely the most expansive Pup record we've heard. I love how they kind of mix up their pop punk and indie rock roots with elements of alternative country and even heavy metal, which is used in a very kick-ass way on the track Full Blown Meltdown. Also the closing track on here, City, which is definitely probably the closest the band has come to sort of a dreamy, sort of sad American football type song, pretty much. I love this record. There's like very little complaints I have about it. I mean, any of the sort of constructive criticisms I may have had in my initial review of the album, some of that's kind of melted away as time went on a little bit. Morbid Stuff, it is morbid stuff, but it is most certainly great stuff too. Then at number 3, it's interesting how majority of my top 5 are albums that have grown on me over time, but that's just the way it was in 2019 for me. Like this one is no exception. That would have to be the new Richard Dawson record, 2020. I never really listened to much Richard Dawson before this record, but I definitely can see why some of my peers like The Needle Drop have been drooling over this dude's music the last couple of years. This album like features some very interesting, kind of hilarious, witty, and bleak observations at everyday life, as well as kind of consumerism and the environment and stuff like that. I mean, this album, like, if you dig a little deeper, you'll realize just how kind of dark a lot of what he's talking about really is, and how it definitely has some melancholy to it for sure. Even if you look at a song like Jogging, where he seems to be using jogging as some sort of anxiety relief, it still has its inner kind of just, kind of unrest about it. I also love the elements of math rock and prog rock that are on this album too. There's a lot more synths on this album. And it's his most accessible record to date too. I mean, even though the songs are pretty long, majority of them are 5+ minutes, they still feel like songs that are pretty easy to swallow. Even if their lyrics aren't necessarily that easy, necessarily. His singing on here is really good. I definitely love how, even though some of his sounds are akin to like Isaac Brock or Conor Oberst, he still sounds like his own sort of talent and songwriter for sure. 2020 definitely is an album that, I don't know if 2020 will be just like this album, but we'll have to see. Then at number 2, another album that I have here on my vinyl shelf, and one that you've probably seen on nearly every year-end list put out this year. This album is like one of the most critically acclaimed releases of the year, and it totally deserves it. And that is Weyes Blood's Titanic Rising. Beautiful record. As you could tell from my review of this album, I definitely had pretty much no negative whatsoever to say about it. It's a near perfect chamber pop record over here. It's definitely like from the songwriting to Natalie Merring's like impeccable vocal harmonies, as well as the sound of this record does a good job of sort of taking inspiration from like a bunch of soft rock from like and psychedelic pop from like the 60s and 70s without sounding too like dated or like nostalgic. I mean, I guess it is kind of nostalgic in a way, but it definitely feels very modern at the same time too. I mean, the song Movies definitely is my song of the year. It's gorgeous. I think the way the album flows is really cool. And I think it's cool how, even though this record sounds like a concept album, from the title, it's pretty much anything but a concept album. It flows like just this really cohesive, focused record that's just so beautifully arranged and written. Highly recommend this album. It deserves all its critical acclaim, but not quite my album of the year at the same time. Not quite my favorite of the year. My number 1 of the year. Oh boy, this is a pretty big announcement I have to make. My number 1 of the year. Alright. The new JPEGMAFIA record, All My Heroes Are Cornballs. Excellent record right here. It definitely makes sense, that all the jokes and all the memes on this record about people being disappointed in it are definitely, anything but true. Like, because really actually, majority of Peggy's biggest fans who have been waiting for this album for a while, like he's dropping Yandi, actually loved this album, said it was his best album yet, and I agree. JPEGMAFIA has definitely come out with his best album over here. The production, his sort of satire, and his lyrics on how he sort of observes what it's like to be a rapper who sort of starts out in the underground and then eventually becomes one of critics' favorites when it comes to the more abstract side of rap. And rap, as well as, I love how, even though the songs are short, majority of which end abruptly, they still feel like a journey and still feel like him sort of taking, you know, what you may know about producers and how they make music and sort of turning it on its head a little bit. I mean, some of the even the interludes on this album are great, and how he sort of satirizes people making these like blank type beat tracks, as well as creating a pretty cool take on a commercial for a beverage with the track about So Real. Some of the features on here, like the Helena DeLand feature on here, was gorgeous. All just on probably one of my favorite tracks on here, Free the Frail. I mean, that song has one of the best hooks I've heard in 2019. Which is saying something, given that this album actually is not a very chorus-centric album. It's definitely pretty abstract. It's kind of for particular tastes, even though I think it incorporates elements of pop rap incredibly well. I mean, this is some impeccable usage of auto-tune on this album. Definitely making it probably my second favorite rap album of the year, album of the decade, right after Good Kid, Mad City. Crazy, I know. Bold statement, but, you know, I just love this album so freaking much. It's definitely shows what it shows on full display what JPEGMAFIA does so incredibly well. And I'm really looking forward to how his future goes. And I hope that he kind of blows up a little more than he already has, because he is definitely, you know, Peggy's a genius. You know, I definitely was not disappointed in this album, not one bit. Yeah, that's my top 10 albums of the year for 2019. I definitely was very happy with this year overall in terms of its music. I definitely can't believe it that the decade is over, because it's definitely been a pretty amazing decade for music too. And I'll see y'all in 2020. Damn, buttermilk Jesus.